In our last CFOIQ interview, I talked with a global finance executive who shared how juggling was an important aspect of the role of CFO. Stay with us today because in this interview, you'll hear why when a certain industry spreads its wings, it's just as important as when CFOs juggle. Welcome to CFOIQ, where CFOs share insights and intelligence on innovative growth strategies and the experiences that drive success for their companies and themselves. I'm your host, Andy Zazos. On today's show, I'm joined by another longtime friend, an impressive global aviation business and finance executive, Claude Draillard. Claude is a founder of AvionGarde, a problem-solving consulting firm that provides tailored financial solutions to aviation companies, including strategic planning, FP&A, aircraft financing, market analysis, and company organization. AvionGarde is a partner of Halo Aircraft Leasing and High Altitude Partners. Before founding AvionGarde, Claude served as CFO at Honda Aircraft, Dassault Falcon Jet, and other impressive companies. In 2024, the U.S. aerospace industry, including defense, generated $995 billion in sales. That was up 4.2% from the previous year. The industry is supported by approximately 1,400 companies nationwide. Now, you're going to enjoy today's discussion, I'm certain of it, and you'll especially love Claude's Brooklyn accent. Claude, it's so great to chat with you. I'm so glad you agreed to appear with us here and to share your perspectives with the CFO IQ audience.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Thanks for the introduction, and always a pleasure to participate in anything you're doing.
Well, hold on a second, Claude. I thought today was going to be a full-service interview. Where's your guitar?
It's right here. It's literally right here on the stand.
All right, so it's staying right there?
It's staying right there for now. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. You let me bust your chops enough today. Thank you. Let's talk aerospace and in particular, international trade tariffs. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about supply chain and technology. So explain to our audience why international trade is important to the aerospace industry as we know it today.
Yeah, it's as when you look at the industry as it is today, basically not one country can do everything in an airplane, whether it's in the design, engineering, manufacturing engineering, all the electronics, the software, all those incredible little parts that in the end make an airplane and more importantly, make the airplane fly and fly safely. But, it's not only today. It's going back to the beginning. If you think about it, right, the Wright brothers, after their historical flight in Killdale Hills, North Carolina, what did they do? They did not just build bicycles in their hangar in Ohio. They actually toured Europe and North Africa and started to sell airplanes in those countries. So the international aspect of aerospace goes back to the very beginning. And we never stopped. We just specialize in different parts and bits and pieces, but we never stopped. We've always been international. And if you think about it, an airplane flies. Does it care about the borders? Not really.
So talk about international trade then and the effect that aerospace. No, let me ask the question differently. How does international trade affect aerospace differently than in other industries?
I think very specifically because of that, because our supply chain, our knowledge, our customers, everything is international. If you think about it, a company close to me, Gulfstream Aerospace, a division of General Dynamics. Oof, we're drawing a blank here. But Gulfstream, about 40% of their revenue is export. If you think of Boeing, the launch customer for the 777 was an international airline, was not a domestic airline. So, we're intricately linked to everything that's happening outside of the country. And you were talking about the 777. To me, the 777 is a great example because 20% of the development of the 777 was done by companies outside of the U.S. It was not Boeing. It wasn't Boeing, but it was done outside of the U.S.
Okay.
If you look at what it takes to put together a Boeing 777, about 30 to 40%, depending on the version, is coming from outside the country. Boeing is basically an assembly line, and they buy components specifically from Japan. About 20% of a 777 is coming from Japan.
So they're not real manufacturing, they're assembling.
Yes, absolutely. They control the IP, they control the knowledge, they control the final product, they control all the variations of engineering, but some specific parts are entirely outsourced. And when I say outsourced, it's more than that. It's even the definition of those parts is outsourced. The central part of the wing is done by Kawasaki in Japan.
Okay, so it's design, engineering, assembly, distribution, sales, service.
Yes, exactly. On the service side, so we were talking about Boeing. So Boeing Global Services, which is one of the three big divisions of Boeing, first is extremely profitable and probably the only one part of Boeing that has been consistently profitable over the years. But they're buying parts from wherever they can. And actually, when they do an exchange of parts, so let's say, your landing gear needs an overhaul. You're the proud owner of a 777. Congratulations, Andy. And your landing gear needs an overhaul. So what do? They're going to exchange that landing gear. So they're going to send you a new one, but they become the owner of the old one. The old one doesn't go back to Boeing. It goes straight to Mitsubishi in Japan, where it's going to be overhauled. And then Mitsubishi is going to ask Boeing, where do you want us to ship it? Right? So it's that complexity and the notion that every part, whether in production or in the aftermarket world, needs to be as close as possible to the airplane and to the customer.
So, with all of the international aspects of an American airplane, help me understand how aerospace contributes to trade deficit? Because, trade deficit and tariffs is a very big topic these days.
It is absolutely a very big topic. And that's, me, that's going to be the contrarian in me. Aerospace is actually a surplus. So we contribute to the deficit, but negatively, or we contribute positively to the trade balance. You can see it either way. But we're basically a surplus industry. We export way more than we import. And the reason for it is very simple. The IP, the intellectual property, is controlled in the US. So everything rotates around that IP. If you control the IP, you control the distribution channel, you control the knowledge, that's where that control is exercised, that you have the added value. And the added value is reflected in how much we export versus how much we import. So you're Boeing, your main customer, you sell to American Airlines, you sell to United, you sell a little bit to Delta. But your big customers are Singapore Airlines, Qatar, Etihad. Well, Etihad not so much these days, but used to be. ANA and Japan Airlines are huge consumers of Boeing products. If you're Gulfstream, we talked about it, you have 40% of Gulfstream is export. But let's go down a little bit in the bill of material. Commercial airplanes, so all the Boeings, the Airbuses, a few Embraers, typically the airlines purchase the aircraft and the engines separately. So what do you do when you buy the engines? Well, you have a choice. You can buy from GE, you can buy from Rolls-Royce, you can buy from Pratt & Whitney, but then it depends which type of engine you're buying, because Pratt & Whitney, well, the engine can be made in Canada. Rolls-Royce, it's an English company, but the engine is assembled in the US. So this notion of where it's made, where the added value is, and which country does the added value belong to, it's becoming a little murky.
So, okay, so let's go from trade deficit and where the products are made to something that's on everybody's lips these days, tariffs. Now, you just said that 20% of Boeing's products are frequently made outside the US. So how are tariffs affecting the aerospace industry, specifically the manufacturers?
It's a complex equation. If you want to look at it very simply, you say, well, Boeing product is American, so there's no tariff on it. Airbus product is European, so there's tariff on it. Embraer's product are Brazilian, there's tariff on it, blah, blah, blah. The reality is a bit more complex because if you look at the Department of Commerce and the Department of State regulations, they will tell you, well, we exclude from the tariff anything that has US content. What is US content? What does that mean? So what everybody's doing, all the manufacturers are doing, and that tier 1, tier 2, even tier 3 suppliers are doing, they're looking at their bill of material and they say, where is this thing coming from? Where is it assembled? So everybody's starting to look at what is the material content of every part? What is the labor content of every part? Where is it from? And they start to peel it off. And now they're going back to the Department of Commerce and the Department of State saying, well, I'm Rolls-Royce. Yes, I'm a UK company, but my engine is using titanium from Ukraine. It's using some parts that are being cast parts that are coming from Mexico. Oh, does the USMCA apply? Yes, no. And it's assembled in the US. So in the end, I have 70% of US content in my engine. So I should be taxed on or tariffed only on 30% of the value of the engine. And that's when the discussion starts. So it's going to really going into the details of the classification of parts for the Department of State and Department of Commerce. It becomes a very, very in-depth exercise. And I have seen recently companies going into their level 4, 5, 6 of their bill of material to do this analysis and try to minimize the impact.
Well, and it's similar to other manufacturers, like the auto manufacturing industry has got very similar discussions that they're having with the Department of Commerce. But okay, so manufacturers sell to airlines. How are tariffs affecting, on a trickle-down basis, how are they affecting the U.S. airline industry?
They are impacting, and my first thought about it is it does and it doesn't. And I'm going to have to be a little technical about the transaction here. So you are Delta. You're a massive importer of Airbus products, right? A330s, A320s, A320, 220s now. The 220s, well, they're coming from Canada. Gasp. How do I do this? They're sold by a European company, but they're really coming from Canada. How does that work? Well, I'm buying an A330 where the A330 is assembled in Toulouse, France. So what tariff applies to it? Oh, wait, the engines are GE engines. They came from the US originally. Oh, well, yes, but the nacelle of the engines came from the UK, which now has a separate trade agreement with the US. So the complexity of all this, suddenly the alliance goes, you know what? I'm going to do something really, really good for me in the short term, but maybe not so good in the long term. I'm going to say, I'm not buying the airplane. I'm going to lease the aircraft. So now you've got a lessor who's going to buy the airplane, get the airplane on a registry, not necessarily US, and let Delta be the operator of the aircraft in the US. Interesting thought. So what do the lessors do? The lessors are saying, well, okay, so I was buying this A330 for $150 million. So now I've got a 20% tariff on it. So now it's a $156 million airplane. Okay, I'm going to amortize that additional tariff on the life of the lease. So your lease rate is no longer 1.2%, it's 1.4%. That is going to eventually impact the price of the ticket that you and I are buying.
Right.
It's going to take time. And I think this is something we're seeing throughout many industries where, a lot of economists were expecting to see inflation rise very quickly. And it seems to be happening, but at a very slow pace and at a very regular but trending pace. I think this is what we're seeing. We're seeing that the importers in the US were impacted. They found a way to try to at least smooth out the effect of the tariff. And this is why it's a progressive impact on the economy.
Sounds like the effect on the consumer who's buying a ticket on an airplane will come initially from parts and eventually from new aircraft purchases.
I have a great story about that. One of my acquaintances at Bombardier, very well-renowned aircraft manufacturer, in the early days of tariffs, was telling me that story. So he had a customer who was stranded. I think it was somewhere in Asia, and the guy said, "Well, can you send me? This is the part that's broken. Send me the part." Bombardier said, "Well, I can ship you the parts, but I have only one serviceable part available, and it's in Chicago. Because you are in that specific country in Asia, when it crosses the border into that country, it's going to be hit by a 50% tariff. And you are the importer of record. I'm not. You becoming the owner of the part. So you're going to have to pay the tariff." And the guy was, all up in arms and unhappy and yelling at Bombardier. And Bombardier said, "Sorry, there's nothing I can do. These are the rules." The crazy part of that, no pun intended, is that the broken parts went back to Bombardier. But it went to Bombardier Repair Center in Frankfurt, Germany. Eventually, Bombardier needed to replace that part in Chicago, so that part was repaired in Frankfurt and shipped to Chicago, where it was hit again by the US tariffs. So that part, in the end, doubled in value for no good reason except tariffs in both the Asian country and the US.
Okay, so let's talk strategy. All right. You've got US aircraft manufacturers, suppliers, and buyers.
Mm-hmm.
What are they doing? How are they, how are they offsetting the impact of tariffs? I mean, is everyone just passing it on? Are they passing it on at cost? Are they passing it on and adding a margin to it? Without a margin, are they dealing with, compression of margins? What are they doing?
All of the above. In the early days, we saw a lot of manufacturers, including tier one suppliers, saying, "Okay, we're gonna eat up a part of the tariffs. We don't know if this thing is gonna hold. Let's wait and see. Yeah, we can take a temporary hit to our margins." So we saw a number of manufacturers and their tier one suppliers saying, "Okay, yeah, this is temporary. This is not going to last. This is not going to hold water. And yeah, let's take a hit on the margins for the time being, and then we'll see." But as time passed, they were like, "Hey, guys, this is killing our cash flow. This is killing our cash generation. We can no longer do this on a long-term basis." So progressively, they started to pass on that cost to the customers. Have they marked it up? I haven't seen that. But what I have seen is definitely everybody in the industry, at whatever level in the industry, even a small riveting tool manufacturer in the US, he's buying his steel from China. So his steel has been hit significantly, and suddenly they saw UPS bill for the tariffs. And I think their controller was not super happy because that was nowhere in his cash flow. But suddenly they had to pay the bill. They just increased the price of absolutely every product they're doing. And so they passed it on. What we're seeing also on suppliers in terms of trying to offset the tariffs, we see different behaviors, whether the supplier is providing parts that go on the airplane or parts that stay off the airplane. And
Does that stay off the airplane?
so consumables, cutting tools that were not, cutting tools, riveting tools, drilling tools, all the small supplies that will be eventually taken off the aircraft. Mostly, I'm thinking of temporary panels that are glued in, that kind of items. So those guys tend to have different strategies than the guys that actually provide the parts for the airplane. The reason for that is that there is always an idea in everybody's mind that at some point, all the governments will go back to their senses and reapply the old 1979 trade agreement for aircraft and aircraft parts that yielded a 0% tariff on everything aircraft related. It's not the case for the tool providers who are being hit either on the supply chain or when they export, and then they pass on that cost. You were mentioning aircraft buyers. So this is an interesting one. We talked about the airlines using the lease as operating leases as a way to offset or go around the tariffs or amortize the impact of the tariffs. There is something interesting about that. Leases are very ubiquitous in the airline world. There are very few airlines that actually own their entire fleet. They own a portion of the fleet, but a large portion of the fleet is being leased. This is unknown, literally unknown in the private aviation world. Whether you're buying a $500,000 Cessna 172 or a $75 million Gulfstream 700 or $56 million Dassault 6X, very few buyers are using leases. However, because of the tariffs, suddenly we see an appetite for it. And it's interesting to see how the financing market is reacting to it.
Well, that would make an awful lot of sense, right? If I can delay a significant upfront cost, why not?
Yeah, exactly. As long as the lessors have the means to get it financed, why not?
Yeah, very interesting. All right, so let's stay with tariffs. So you can answer this question relative to the aerospace industry or industry in general, but what do you think of the argument that tariffs provide an incentive to move industrial activities to the U.S.? Are we, first of all, I'd be curious to get your thoughts as to whether you think that's a true incentive, whether tariffs are really an incentive, and are you seeing companies come into the U.S. for new manufacturing facilities that weren't here previously?
All right, there are plenty of moving parts in that question. So let me give you maybe a little bit of background here. A lot of the international aircraft manufacturers or participants at whatever level in the supply chain of airplanes already had some activities in the US, not because of tariffs, because of exchange rates. Right? They sell in US dollars. So they want to have at least a portion of their cost in US dollar because that creates a natural hedging. Right? You receive dollars, you sell out dollars, fine, no impact. It has very little impact on your balance sheet and your margin analysis. So this existed to some extent already. Now, when we think of moving significant parts, nearshoring or onshoring significant parts of industrial activities, in the short term, it's not going to happen, right? It takes 10 years to develop a new engine. It takes 5 years at least to develop a new aircraft. So once you've made that investment, you're not going to change everything for something that might not last more than 4 years.
So are you suggesting that if a company is interested in developing a new engine or a new aircraft or a significant part to an aircraft, that might be the impetus to launch a new facility in the US, but if they're already tooled up in another country, probably wouldn't make sense to bring that operation here just because of tariffs?
Yeah, there is that aspect. There is another aspect to that, and it depends in which portion of aviation you're in. Cost of production is sometimes higher in the US than in other countries for the same. You've got a regulation issue, especially if you're thinking of newer technology with AI applications, or with everything we can hear about electric small aircraft like VTOLs or so vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, which is to my mind a reinvention of the helicopter, which we already had for some reason. Anyway, that's another discussion, one another day. But if you think of all that, the FAA may not be the right authority to work with, and it can be very complex to work with. So imagine you are Kawasaki and you build those structural sections of wings for Boeing for the 777, and you do other stuff like some parts for Gulfstream, a few parts for Lockheed Martin. Well, creating all that in the US, first, is a huge investment. We're talking billions of dollars to recreate manufacturing capabilities in the US. Now, you've got this, but the FAA didn't give you a production agreement. So now you're going to have to spend more money and wait. And it's a process. And getting a POA, so a production agreement from the FAA, can take up to 3 years. What do you do in the meantime? You stop delivering to Boeing and Lockheed? Not really, right? So I think it's really a question for each company, whether or not it makes sense, whether or not they believe that tariffs are here to stay, and manage that relationship with the key manufacturer who's going to do the final assembly and who's purchasing the parts. And can they pass on that cost? So I think there are a few business cases where onshoring can make sense. Is it going to be the majority in aerospace? I don't think so.
So answer that same question for me relative to supply chain. Is in a global industry like aerospace, could supply chain be the incentive for a company to locate in one country or another? Or how else would supply chain affect the industry?
In the last 36 months, we've had, maybe the last 5 years really, we've had crazy supply chain situations. So yes, there was COVID and some disorganization that was linked to that, but not only. Frankly, in aerospace, COVID was nothing compared to the conflict in Ukraine. 80% of the titanium and the aluminum used in aerospace was coming from Ukraine before the conflict.
And now?
Now, everybody's trying to make other sources come up in line. A lot of them in Africa, a few in Asia. It's hard. It takes time. The quality is not there. It creates other headaches. So supply chain right now for many manufacturers, whether aircraft or engine manufacturers, is in shambles. I even heard recently at a trade show, a representative of a very established company saying, it's not going to be fixed in my lifetime. And the guy is younger than me.
Wow.
So there's, I think the tariffs add to that situation. Is it the main problem? Not really. It's a main problem when you're talking about delivering the final goods or the aftermarket goods to the customer. But in terms of purely supply chain management, it's just one more element in an environment that was significantly broken to start with.
You've got the elements of a perfect storm between tariffs and supply chain.
I can add to it.
Go for it.
Wait. Well, a lot of manufacturers during COVID laid off a number of people. Actually, what they did is they started by providing retirement plans to a number of older employees. Well, guess what? Now they need those people to help them restart their supply chain or fix the supply chain. And you've got a significant portion of the population that says, you know what? I'm a happy retiree. I'm not coming back. And so we've got this sudden loss of knowledge that is impacting everybody at all different kinds of levels in the industry. And it's the big OEMs, but not only. It affects also smaller companies, the companies that are $100, $300 million in revenue. They had the same behavior. And now they're like, well, there was one guy that knew how to do this, and he's not coming back.
Yeah, perfect storm.
Perfect storm.
All right, so in your global perspective, right? And you've done cross-border business your whole career. Um, what do you see happening in other countries? We talked a lot about the U.S. aerospace industry. What's happening in other countries?
Well, they're scratching their heads in many ways. They look at the US and how they were used to doing business with the US, either buying or selling, and they're very perplexed. They have no idea if it's still a reliable business partner. They're surprised by the lack of consistency and the lack of clarity that they're getting from the US government, from defense contractors. Not so much by the airlines. The airlines are just saying, we're trying to do what we can with what we know. So they're. I think most countries right now are trying to find workarounds and say, the shock phase is behind us. Now they're in the okay. This happened. How can we work around this? How do we, in a very Churchillian way, they plan for the worst and hope for the best. So they're really looking at what can we do? Do we really? They're even for some specific areas in aviation. They're looking at, do we really need the U.S. market? Especially when you see Indonesia, India, China ramping up really quickly, in the demand ramping up really quickly. Like, well, is the U.S. market still my focus? Um, uh, it's not in aerospace; it's in the automotive world. But I heard something recently that surprised me. In 2024, BMW sold 360 some thousand cars in the U.S. They sold 825,000 cars in China alone.
Wait,
So it would be
give me those numbers again. How many in the U.S.
360,000 in the US,
and how many in China?
825,000. So if you're BMW, what's your incentive?
Yeah. And that's just China. That's not in Europe.
Yeah.
And that's not in South America.
That's China. So it's that data struck me, and I was wondering, okay, am I seeing the same thing in aviation? Not yet. Not yet. We're still seeing the US as being the powerhouse in terms of consumption of airplanes and aftermarket services and parts. Uh, depending on the segment in aviation, between 60 and 75% of the deliveries are in the US. So we're still a powerhouse from that standpoint. But what we're seeing is the airspace is opening in China. It's no longer fully controlled by the military. You've got more leeway if you want to operate a private aircraft in China. You don't have to be an airline systematically. Indonesia right now, they're dying to get newer generation of seaplanes because, they've got 800 islands.
Mm.
And there's none. If you look at the seaplanes that are on the market, I mean, it's old technologies. It's 1960s technologies with floats on it. The newer one might be the Kodiak, and that's, 25 years old already. So it's interesting to see how different parts of the world are suddenly waking up to commercial aviation, but business aviation as well. And that creates a little bit of question mark for the manufacturers saying, what do I need to do? Do I need to create JVs locally, produce locally, at least have an agent representing me locally? How is going to make this work? And then you have the tariffs on top of that, and you're like, okay, if I try to do an offset program with that country and buy some of their stuff, well, yeah, but if I consume it in the US, it's going to be tariffed. And then there will be retaliatory tariffs against my products if I export to that country. So they're all trying to find the right balance. And so far, to quote an old Depeche Mode song, they don't get the balance right.
So staying with the whole cross-border issue, there are voices, especially in Europe, who they're suggesting that they there should be a technological independence from the U.S. So I'm not sure I get that. What does that mean, a technological independence as it relates to the aerospace industry?
I think it's the best example is in the defense world. Um, Saab, Swedish company, has a great combat aircraft called the Gripen. And the Gripen is a fantastic little airplane, single engine, does things really, really well, great electronics. We're on the second or third generation of the Gripen already. And it's a great airplane. It's a fantastic airplane. Ukraine is looking at buying 100 of them.
This is a military aircraft or
Aircraft, that's for air defense, yes. And the reason why the Gripen hasn't had a lot of success in Europe, even though it's built in Sweden, right, next door, it's actually part of the EU, is because the engine is American. It's a Pratt & Whitney engine. The counterpart of that, or the counterweight of that, is the Dassault Rafale, which is a purely European aircraft. There is not one part of US content in the airplane, of non-European content. It's actually mostly French content in the airplane. There are a few parts from elsewhere in the EU, but it's a 80 or 90% French airplane. So that's what technological independence means, right? Because if Congress says to Saab, no, we're not going to allow the export of our engine to Ukraine, the sale is over, right? You're not going to sell the airplane, period. And you don't have an option. So that's what they mean. So my view of it, and that's a very personal interpretation, is it's extremely potent in the defense world. And we see it with the Rafale. We saw it in the past with the Typhoon, the Eurofighter Typhoon. There's a lot of discussion. You've got two competing next generation fighter projects in Europe, one led by the Brits, the other one led by a Franco-German conglomerate. And the two are radically different in their approach to US content. The Franco-German is absolutely only European content. The British one is more open. Actually, they have the Japanese in it. So they're more open to having some US content in there. In the civilian market, whether it's commercial aircraft or business jets, I don't think it's as important. And the reason for it is you want to build a new airplane, right? Your choice of engines, if you're in the super mid-size and above category, you got three potential providers of engines. You've got two, maybe three providers of avionics for the cockpit. Flight control systems are usually with the aircraft manufacturer. Interiors, frankly, most of them are done in the US, come what may. So your choice is very limited. Saying that, we can do without is just not realistic, at least not in the next 10 years.
Okay. Everyone's talking about AI in every industry and whether it's B2B or B2C. AI, AI, AI.
Mm-hmm.
In the ground transportation industry, Tesla and other companies are focusing on unmanned vehicles. So how do AI and unmanned aviation systems, how will they affect aerospace going forward?
Well, AI is already here in multiple ways in aviation. We've been using AI for a few years already to do route optimization, especially over the Atlantic and over the Pacific.
But that's on the airline side, right?
On the airline, even on for private operators. If you own a Falcon jet, you have a little piece of software called Falcon Sphere that actually looks at your city pairs and say, hey, if you fly from that waypoint to that waypoint instead of those waypoints, you're going to save on fuel, you're going to save on direct operating costs, you're going to save on time, and you can give the software where your emphasis is, and the software will tell you, okay, yes, you have got the right routing or not. So it's already there. In production, you already have technicians that have goggles with augmented reality or virtual reality in some cases to tell you, hey, this cable that's here, it according to the drawings, it shouldn't be here. It should be there. And so it's already there. And then the AI is already giving you the analysis of, hey, this is what I'm detecting that is not per drawing. So it's already there. It's been used actually for almost a decade in what we call predictive maintenance. Well, it was basically the first generations of agentic AIs that were doing that. And some was on the airplane, some was on the ground. It was a mixed bag of both. But it's going to grow. What it's going to do is probably help the manufacturers and the operators optimize the usage of parts and aftermarket services and improve cash flow, basically reduce costs and improve cash flow. So we're already seeing some effect of that. There will be more. There are plenty of startup companies in the US and internationally that have all kinds of ideas in terms of AI. There's a company in Germany called FlyVBird who's doing almost on-demand flights with commercial-grade airplanes or with commercial-grade airports. There was a company in the US that is relaunching that used to be called Dayjet in Florida, for those who remember that name, that is really, really doing some incredible stuff on AI right now, and they're looking for first application of that. And it's more about the optimization of the usage of business jets when you're a fleet of business jets. In terms of unmanned vehicles, that was the second part of your question.
Yeah.
It's too early to tell. I mean, I read a lot of things. Yes, on the military side, you've got drones and some are semi-autonomous. Now, the software exists for drones to be fully autonomous. And all the logics of using swarms of drones alongside a piloted combat aircraft, the logic already exists. And the logic has been developed both usually by NATO. It was at the NATO level. And we're starting to see it with the F-35s in the US. We're seeing it in Ukraine a little bit in a different formats, in a less industrial format, I would say. But we're going to see it in Europe as well with the next generation of software for the Typhoon and the Rafale. The F5 standard of the Rafale will fully be capable of having the manned aircraft basically managing this tactical level with the drones around it. So it's coming. There are the things that are more questionable, especially in terms of passenger. If you're looking at companies like Blade, well, they're still using a classic helicopter. You're looking at Archer, Joby. Well, right now, it's basically the US military that is trying to figure out how to use that goddamn aircraft. And they're not quite sure how to do it. Joby recently announced that they were going into civilian certification. Wait and see. But for now, it's for the piloted version. What we're seeing, though, is more on the logistics side on the unmanned aircraft. And I've got a story. It's a company I support in Southeast Asia. They have developed a few logistics drones. So small drones that are capable of carrying, for the smallest one, up to 2 kilograms. For the biggest one, the current biggest one, and there's a bigger coming up in the next few years, but the current biggest one, I think, is up to 50 kilograms. And they're actually in the middle of a trial in their country, in their home country, for beyond visual line of sight usage of those unmanned aircraft to go from the airport to downtown to deliver parcels, especially for law firms, insurance firms, all the people that have small packages, not very heavy. But the airport is 60 miles away. It's just too far to drive, and you're going to be stuck in traffic. And so the big guys like UPS, DHL, FedEx are looking at that saying, hey, we could improve our service level agreements if we had that and had that automated. So I think this is what we're going to see first. And then we're going to see that expanding to passengers. But I think it's another solid 5 years before we see passengers on that kind of aircraft.
Yeah. I don't think passengers would be early adopters for unmanned planes.
I thought not.
I think you're correct. So earlier in our discussion, you mentioned that China's airspace is opening up, and China's the big dog in a lot of discussions, or I should say, the perceived big dog in a lot of business discussions. Um, and you know, Boeing has got products that are coming out of China and has been delivering into China. As the U.S. Chinese trade war keeps going on and back and forth, and it keeps throwing barbs at each other, what do you think the impact is going to be for the aerospace industry overall?
Short term, not much. Like you mentioned, Boeing has been selling into China for a number of years. Airbus has an assembly line there. So does Embraer. So there's already a good level of activity and of trade back and forth between China and the rest of the world. Most interestingly, if you look at what China has been able to develop on the defense side of aerospace, I mean, A50 is absolutely comparable to an F-22, and actually, some analysts are kind of hinting that it could even be better than we think. Uh, in the civilian world, um, there is a, a government-owned company in China called Comac, and Comac has one product, the C919. Uh, So it's an okay aircraft. It's not a great aircraft. It has similarities with the Airbus 220 because it was originally the Bombardier C series, and some of the systems were developed jointly between Comac and Bombardier. Um, the C919 so far has not been sold outside of China, and I don't think it ever will be sold outside of China, just because it doesn't match the performance of Western-produced airplane. Period. The next airplane that Comac will come up with would probably be a significant threat to both Boeing and Airbus. So I'm really waiting.
Why is that? Why a significant threat?
Because they will have improved the avionics, they will have improved the design, they will have improved the engines, and they're getting smarter. I mean, there's no doubt. Look at what they've done. 10 years ago, the automobile industry in China was almost all import, and there was almost nothing produced in China. And now it's this powerhouse that's flooding every market except maybe the US. But I was surprised. I was in Europe last month, and I was surprised at the number of BYDs and MGs I was seeing everywhere in Europe. And they're really flooding the market with electric vehicles. So can they replicate that model on aerospace? Yeah, I think they can, and I think they will. Um, I think first they're going to keep improving the defense side. Then they will go into commercial aviation. Will they go into business aviation? That's a good question. But if I were Gulfstream, Bombardier, Cessna, and Dassault, I'll be worried. And I think they are.
Okay, so let's go back. In 1979, the agreement on trade in civil aircraft pretty much eliminated tariffs on civil aircraft, on the engines and on related parts. Other than reverting to that agreement, what would be a good scenario for tariffs in aerospace?
There's no better scenario than this one.
Yeah.
Ask Pilatus. So Pilatus is a Swiss aircraft manufacturer. They build small airplanes, trainers for the armed forces. It's called PC-6 and PC-21. And they have a single engine turboprop, which is very popular in the US, called the PC-12. And they have a small, mid-size jet aircraft called the PC-24. With the current 39% tariff on Swiss products, they decided to stop delivering in the US. Period.
Wow.
What you have to remember is there is a facility in Colorado owned by Pilatus that does all the interior and the paint jobs for every airplane they used to deliver in the US. So you've got about 200 and 250 people right now without a job. So it has a direct impact very quickly. Now, Pilatus is now saying that they're contemplating restarting deliveries in the US. But interestingly, what I've seen is the first airplane that they say has been delivered in the US, they delivered to a US national in Switzerland. What's going to happen to that airplane when it crosses the Atlantic? I have no idea. But man, I'm going to look for that transaction because I want to know.
Wow. That's a very interesting approach.
Yes. Yes, it is. So, you know, um, there's been this agreement between the US and the UK, which builds 15% tariffs on aircraft parts, aircraft parts and engines. It's 10% with the EU, assuming the EU Parliament ratifies the agreement, which it should, at last I heard. I think it's still going to leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth. And the best option is really to go back to that 1979 agreement. I mean, frankly, if you look historically what that agreement did, it prevented the countries that already had the technology to develop complex parts, including engines in a full airplane. It kept them at bay and kept them using US technology, and it helped the US manufacturers push that technology worldwide. I'm a little concerned that if we don't go back to that, we're now going to give them an incentive to say, you know what, screw it, we're going to develop our stuff.
Claude, this has been a great discussion. I always love when we have that opportunity to get together. What are your final thoughts for the aerospace industry?
I think it's a great time to be in this industry. Between the push we're seeing for carbon footprint reduction in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, when we see the constant increase in need for transportation in the United States and to a lesser extent, other parts of the Americas, I think this is a great time to be in here. There's going to be tons of new technology. There's going to be a ton of new transactions, and we're seeing new buyers. Especially in the business aviation world, we see younger generations say, you know what, we want the flexibility of flying when we want, where we want, without too many restrictions. And the airlines do not provide that service. So we need our own airplane. And we see the same philosophy now growing in Asia, in Europe. There's tons of new technology coming up there between electrification, hydrogen, fuel cells, new materials. It's going to be fun. The next 10 years are going to be a lot of fun.
Sounds like it's exciting. Claude, I want to thank you very, very much for agreeing to come on the show today. This has been a great conversation. I hope we get to do this again and again. I am absolutely certain that not only your CFO peers, but also your colleagues in the aerospace industry will get a lot out of today's discussion. Thanks for sharing so openly. I truly appreciate that.
Thank you, Andy. It was fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you too for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about Claude Draillard, visit us at CFOIQ.com. If you'd like to be considered for a CFOIQ interview or for a business story in CFO Intelligence magazine, or if you just have some really great topics that you'd like us to explore, email me at andrew.zizas@CFOintel with 2 L's.com and let me know your thoughts. Join us again here on CFOIQ for our next interview with Gary Piscatelli, former CFO and now CEO of Astor Chocolate Corporation. Gary's an incredibly bright and accomplished executive and someone you'll also enjoy listening to. He doesn't have the Brooklyn accent, though, that Claude Draillard has. You'll enjoy his interview, I'm sure. Thanks very much for watching, for joining us here on CFOIQ. I'm Andrew Zizas. We'll see you again. You keep thinking.
For booking inquiries, please visit www.cfoiq.com or email andrew.zizas@cfointell.com.